I was 15 years old when I learned that working hard and becoming wealthy were two completely different things. At that age, I didn't know anything about investing. I didn't understand leverage. I didn't know what cash flow meant. I didn't know why some people seemed to make money while they were sleeping, while people like me had to prove every hour we worked just to get paid. All I knew was labor, heavy labor. I worked demolition jobs, cleaned abandoned warehouses, carried broken bricks, pulled rusty steel out of old concrete, and loaded construction waste onto trucks. $9 an hour, that was my price. 1 hour of my life was worth $9. If I worked 10 hours, I made 90. If I was sick, I made nothing. If it rained and the job was canceled, I made nothing. If I stopped moving, the money stopped moving too. At the time, I thought that was simply how life worked. Then one afternoon changed everything. Our crew had been hired to clear an old industrial building outside the city. It had belonged to a construction company decades earlier. The place looked dead. Broken windows, rusted steel, cracked concrete, water stains running down the walls. Anything obviously valuable had already been removed. Copper wire was gone. Machinery was gone. Metal doors had been sold. Even the ceiling fans had disappeared. Everyone saw junk. I saw another exhausting shift. Near the back wall, underneath rotten plywood and broken tiles, I found a small rusted metal cabinet. I kicked it once. It barely moved. I assumed it was empty. I was about to drag it toward the scrap pile when a voice behind me said, "Don't." I turned around. His name was John. He was 68 years old, a retired construction engineer. He had spent almost 4 decades inspecting factories, bridges, public buildings, and industrial projects. 2 fingers on his left hand were damaged from an accident years earlier. He walked slowly, but he noticed everything. He looked at the cabinet. I said, "It's garbage." John looked at me. "You decided that quickly. There's nothing valuable in it. How do you know?" I looked. He smiled. "You looked once." Then he said, "Look again." We broke the lock. Inside were old engineering notebooks, soil reports, drainage plans, hand-drawn zoning maps, construction records from the 1990s. To me, they looked like old paper. To John, they were information. He sat on an overturned bucket and slowly turned the pages. Then he pointed to a faded line running through one of the maps. "See this?" I looked. "A road?" "A planned road." I looked outside. There was no road, only weeds and broken fencing. "So the plan failed?" John shook his head. "No, the road is late." I didn't understand. He folded the map carefully. Then he told me something I would remember for the rest of my life. The first time you walk through a property, you see what everyone else sees. The second time you walk through slowly, you start seeing what everyone else missed. That became his rule, the second walk. Whenever John inspected a property, he never trusted his first impression. The first walk was quick: roof, walls, foundation, road access, drainage, neighbors, noise, the obvious things. Then he left. Sometimes he drank coffee. Sometimes he sat across the street. Sometimes he waited until a different time of day. Then he returned. The second walk was slower, much slower. He looked behind repaired walls. He watched where rainwater collected. He spoke to shop owners nearby. He checked utility access. He compared old planning maps to current digital maps. He studied traffic. He watched how trucks entered and left. He asked what the neighborhood used to be. Then he asked what it might become. I once asked him why the second walk mattered so much. He said, "The first walk shows you what exists. The second walk shows you what could exist." I started following him whenever I could. And the more I watched, the more I realized something strange. At construction sites, men like me worked every hour for money. But the people who owned the properties didn't. One landlord owned a warehouse we repaired. He visited for 20 minutes. Then he left. Another man owned several rental buildings. He collected money every month whether he touched the buildings or not. A family owned an ugly piece of empty land near a highway. They rented it to a trucking company for parking. I was carrying bricks for $9 an hour. They were being paid because trucks were sitting on dirt they owned. That bothered me, not because I hated them, because I finally understood the difference. Labor created income once. Ownership could create income repeatedly. That was the first time I realized I didn't want to spend my entire life selling hours. I wanted to own something that kept working after I stopped. John taught me another rule. Never buy when everybody suddenly needs something. Buy when everybody is tired of owning it. Most contractors bought pumps, ladders, waterproofing tools, and repair equipment right before storm season. That was when prices were high. So I did the opposite. At the end of the season, contractors wanted storage space back. They sold equipment cheap. I started buying used tools. Not because they were beautiful, because they were useful, and because I knew someone would need them again. By 17, I had enough equipment to take small jobs myself. Roof repairs, drain cleaning, waterproofing, emergency maintenance. But I didn't want to keep chasing one small invoice after another. So I offered something different. A fixed annual maintenance package. One price. Roof inspection, drain cleaning, minor repairs, storm preparation, emergency callouts. 11 wealthy households accepted. That taught me another lesson. Rich people don't always pay more because they love spending money. Sometimes they pay because they hate thinking about small problems. They don't want 12 separate bills. They want one problem solved once. By 17, I had saved a little over $14,000. My friends told me to buy a car. I bought a terrible house. It was a narrow 3-story townhouse near an old industrial district. Cracked walls, mold, broken plumbing. The ground floor flooded during heavy rain. The alley was so narrow that 2 cars could barely pass. Everyone who looked at it hated it. So did I, on the first walk. Then I remembered John. I came back. The second time, I didn't just inspect the house. I studied the neighborhood. I talked to a woman selling noodles across the street. I asked delivery drivers where traffic became difficult. I checked the drains. I watched where water collected. Then I opened the city's digital planning map on my phone. The alley was marked for future expansion. Not guaranteed, not immediate, but planned. If the road was widened, the property would suddenly have much better access. The ugly house could become something very different. But there was risk. The expansion could happen in 2 years, 10 years, or never. That was the first time I understood the price of hidden value. If everyone knew exactly what would happen, the opportunity would already be expensive. I used almost all my savings and bought the house. That night I couldn't sleep. I wasn't celebrating. I was terrified. I moved into the worst room on the ground floor. The room smelled like mold. When it rained, I kept buckets ready. I rented the better rooms upstairs. One of my first tenants was a 71-year-old widow named Iris Calloway. She had lived in the neighborhood for decades. Before signing the lease, she asked me, "How much will you raise the rent next year?" I said, "If you pay on time and take care of the place, I won't." She stared at me. "Never? Never. Even after 5 years?" "Even after 5 years." She smiled. "You're young. You might regret that." Maybe she was right. But she moved in, and every month, on the exact same day, Iris paid her rent. No excuses, no delays. Meanwhile, I discovered what being a landlord actually meant. At 2 in the morning, nobody cares that you are building wealth. If a pipe bursts, you fix it. If the power goes out, you answer the phone. If water comes through the ceiling, you climb onto the roof. Owning property did not remove responsibility, it multiplied responsibility. But every month, when the rent came in, I felt something I had never felt before. I had already worked on the building, but it was still paying me. An hour I had worked months earlier was still producing money. That was different from labor. That was leverage. And once I understood that feeling, I never looked at work the same way again. A year later, I wanted to buy another property, so I went to a bank. I had rental income, savings, receipts, a property that was operating. But I made one mistake. I walked into the bank wearing dirty construction clothes. I had come directly from a job site. My boots were covered in dust. My shirt was stained. The loan officer looked at me for maybe 10 minutes, then rejected me. I left furious. When I told John, he didn't sympathize. He asked, "Why should they trust you?" I showed them the property. "No, you showed them a man asking for money." I didn't understand. Then he said, "If your numbers are good, make them easy to see." The next week, I went back. Clean shirt, organized folder, income statements, repair receipts, property documents, before and after photos, expense records, and most importantly, a full payment history showing that Iris Calloway had paid rent on time every month. Same borrower, Same property, same income, different presentation. This time, the conversation changed. I got the loan. That loan became my second property. Then came the third, the fifth, the 10th. I stopped chasing beautiful properties. Beautiful properties attracted attention. Attention attracted competition. Competition raised prices. I preferred owners who were tired, retiring landlords, factory owners nearing retirement, families inheriting buildings they didn't want, people moving away, people who valued simplicity more than squeezing every last dollar from a sale. By my late 20s, I controlled more than 30 buildings. On paper, I was a millionaire. In real life, I drove a 12-year-old car. The passenger window barely worked. I still compared prices at hardware stores. Sometimes I counted small bills at a car wash because I didn't want to break a larger note. People thought owning millions in property meant having millions in the bank. It didn't. My money was trapped inside buildings, land, loans, repairs, deposits, renovations, accounts. One afternoon, I proudly told John the value of my portfolio. He listened, then asked, "How much cash do you have?" I told him. He shook his head. "You own a lot." Then he looked directly at me. "But you don't breathe much." I knew exactly what he meant. Debt had helped me grow. It also created pressure. Every month, the machine needed money. Loans, insurance, taxes, maintenance, payroll, repairs. John warned me, owning a building and owing money on a building are two completely different feelings. At first, I thought he was being too cautious. Then the economy slowed. 3 tenants paid late. 1 factory tenant disappeared, owing months of rent. 2 properties needed major repairs at the same time. A loan came due for refinancing. Suddenly, the man who looked rich on paper was worried about payroll. That period taught me something numbers had hidden from me. Net worth makes you look wealthy. Cash decides how long you survive. But money created another problem: family. Once relatives heard I was successful, the requests started. A cousin needed money for a business. An uncle wanted me to guarantee a loan. Someone needed capital for land. Someone else had an emergency. At first, I helped. Then another person called. Then another. When I helped one person, others asked why I wouldn't help them too. When I said no, they took it personally. Some relationships changed. I became less like family. More like a bank with a phone number. That hurt. But I learned something painful. If you rescue everyone from every bad decision, eventually you join them. So instead of trying to prove I was generous, I did one thing that mattered to me. I moved my mother into the best apartment I owned. She walked through the place and said, "This is too good for me." I laughed. "No, this is exactly good enough." That was the first time success felt real. Not because I owned 30 buildings, because my mother no longer had to worry about where she would live. Years later, a severe economic downturn hit regional manufacturing and agriculture. Factories closed. Businesses failed. Banks seized properties. One lender ended up holding a package of 20 distressed sites: old factories, warehouses, farmland, industrial buildings. Nobody wanted the whole package. Some properties had poor access. Some were half abandoned. Some had buildings worth almost nothing. Everyone saw problems. I walked every site once. Then I did what John had taught me. I walked them again, slowly. On the second pass, I found things the sales documents barely mentioned. Several properties sat near planned logistics corridors. One had unusually strong electrical infrastructure. 2 parcels carried historical water access rights. Another had a land use classification that allowed industrial activity neighboring parcels could not legally support. One warehouse had a collapsed roof. Most buyers valued it like junk, but the truck access, power capacity, and legal permissions would cost a new developer a fortune to recreate. The building wasn't the real asset. The rights were. The infrastructure was. The access was. That was when I finally understood the deepest version of John's lesson. Sometimes the most valuable part of a property is invisible. I wanted all 20. There was one problem. Buying them would require almost everything I had built. I would need to sell properties, refinance others, use tax-deferred exchanges where legally available, borrow heavily, use reserves, put years of work at risk. For weeks, I barely slept. Everyone around me had an opinion. Some said it was brilliant. Some said I had become arrogant. Some said I was about to destroy myself. I went to see John. He was older now. His hands shook slightly when he poured tea. I showed him the numbers. He read quietly. Then asked, "What do you see?" "Opportunity." "What else?" "Risk." He smiled. "Good." Then he said something I never expected. "I spent my entire life seeing value." He looked down at the table. "But I never believed I deserved to own much of it." I didn't know what to say. This man had taught me to see opportunities. But he had spent his career pointing them out for other people. He had always stayed safe, always stayed on the other side of ownership. I asked, "Do you think I should buy them?" John shook his head. "I taught you how to look. I can't teach you what you're willing to lose." I bought the package. For 18 months, I regretted it almost every morning. Cash disappeared. Repairs cost more than expected. One property stayed empty for nearly a year. The debt felt enormous. People called me reckless. Sometimes I believed them. Then the market began to recover. A logistics company leased 2 sites. A manufacturer paid for access rights. The region entered a dry year. Suddenly, the water rights attached to 2 parcels became extremely valuable. One property I had considered almost useless became one of the most profitable assets in the entire portfolio. Within 3 years, the deal transformed the company. But the moment I remember most had nothing to do with money. One of the properties had once belonged to a man named Daniel Cole. When I was a teenager, Daniel was successful. He owned businesses, nice cars, property. He used to see me carrying construction debris. Once, he looked at me and laughed. "Some men are born to own buildings, others are born to clean them." I remembered that sentence for years. I used it as fuel. I imagined becoming rich enough to make him regret saying it. Then the downturn destroyed his business. His property ended up inside the package I bought. One morning, I drove past the site. Daniel was standing outside. He looked tired, older, smaller than I remembered. For a few seconds, I became 15 again. I could have stopped. I could have reminded him what he said. I could have humiliated him. I could have enjoyed the moment. Instead, I kept driving. The next week, I offered to lease part of the property back to him at a rate he could manage. No speech, no revenge, no lesson. One of my managers asked why. I said, "I spent too many years trying to become successful enough to defeat people who probably forgot they ever hurt me." That was when I finally understood something else John had been teaching me. The second walk was not only about buildings. Sometimes you need to look at people twice. The first time, you see what they did to you. The second time, you see what carrying that anger has done to you. I let it go, and strangely, that felt better than winning. Eventually, the company became too large to operate like a private collection of buildings. We restructured. We brought in institutional capital. Later, we listed the business as a real estate investment trust. Suddenly, properties I had once repaired with my own hands became rows in financial models. Yield, occupancy, capital efficiency, return on equity. Analysts reviewed everything. One day, an advisor found what he considered an obvious mistake. My first townhouse. The ugly building in the narrow alley. Iris Calloway was still living upstairs, and her rent was still almost exactly what I had promised years earlier. The advisor stared at the numbers. "This is far below market." "I know." "You could increase it immediately." "I know." "Then why don't you?" "Because I told her I wouldn't." He leaned back. "That was decades ago." "I know." "We have shareholders now." "I know." He suggested selling the property. I said no. He pushed again. I said no again. Some things become more valuable because you refuse to calculate them. Iris had paid rent on time when I was a teenager, with almost nothing. Her payment history helped convince a bank to trust me. That building was the first stone in everything I created. I wasn't going to rewrite the story because a spreadsheet told me I could make more money. John died the following winter. After the funeral, his daughter walked toward me holding a large envelope. She said, "My father wanted you to have this." Inside was the old hand-drawn planning map from the metal cabinet I had found when I was 15. I recognized it immediately, but now it was covered in pencil marks, dates, addresses, notes. My first townhouse, my mother's apartment, my first warehouse, the 20-property deal. John had quietly mapped my entire journey. At the bottom of the map, he had written one final sentence. "Make sure the next person learns to look twice." I sat alone in my car for almost an hour, holding that map, thinking about the rusted cabinet, the abandoned factory, the 15-year-old kid who almost threw it away. For most of my life, I thought John had been teaching me about real estate. He wasn't. Real estate was just the language. He was teaching me how to see. Not long after John's death, I signed the longest agreement of my career, a 99-year ground lease. I stared at the final page. Then something hit me. I would never see that contract end. Neither would most of the people sitting at the table. For the first time, I was making a decision designed to exist after I was gone. When I was 15, I thought wealth meant escaping $9 hours. At 18, I thought it meant owning one building. At 25, I thought it meant owning many buildings. At 30, I thought it meant surviving debt. Later, I thought wealth meant becoming powerful enough that nobody could ever make me feel small again. I was wrong every time. Today, if you ask me what the most valuable asset I ever owned was, I won't say a warehouse. I won't say farmland. I won't say water rights. I won't say shares in a public company. It was a rusted metal cabinet that everyone else wanted to throw away. Because inside that cabinet was a map, and standing beside it was a 68-year-old engineer named John, who taught me how to look. Most people don't miss opportunities because they are stupid. They miss them because they are in a hurry. They walk through a property once, a business once, a relationship once, a failure once. They see what is obvious, they make a judgment, and they leave. They see the cracked wall and miss the road that may eventually run beside it. They see the broken warehouse and miss the electrical capacity underneath it. They see worthless farmland and miss the water rights attached to it. They see a bad year and assume the story is over. They see someone who hurt them and never notice how expensive carrying that anger has become. I still use John's rule today. Whenever I'm about to buy something important, sell something important, hire someone, fire someone, abandon a project, or make a decision I may not be able to reverse, I walk through it once, then I leave. I clear my head, and I come back, slowly. Because the first walk shows me what is there. The second walk shows me what I failed to see. And sometimes, that second walk changes everything.